Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 23 of the Road to Latin textbook. This story is called Milites Romani, and it's continuing on the idea of the Roman army that we saw in the first story. The first one was really more about the leaders. This is more about the actual soldiers themselves. So we're going to dive in. There's some culture to it that's definitely worth looking at. And it's really focusing again on third declension nouns, which is what this chapter is all about. Before we get too far, though, like I always tell you, if you want some more help with these stories, you can check out my website. My version of the Road to Latin textbook is there with all my grammar notes. There's vocab help, culture, lessons in there too. So there's a bunch of other stuff that might help you understand the story. Feel free to go check it out. And one of the things I would kind of draw your attention to is on my textbook, there's a culture unit about the Roman legionary, which is really what this story is hitting at and what a couple of stories moving on are going to be. So if you're looking for a culture lesson, you can find a bunch of information there. There's links to articles, really good YouTube videos. I think TED Ed had one. Invicta has a few. There's some great stuff there. So if you're looking to learn more about a Roman legionary or just the Roman army in general, you can find it there and it'll help you understand what's going on with this story. Before you dive in, though, again, just make sure you feel really good about the vocab and grammar. This is the second story of chapter 23. So at this point, you should have it under control, but just make sure you do, right? If you don't know what the words mean, it makes it really difficult to read this. So make sure that the vocab you're feeling good about the vocab, that you've read through all the grammar notes on, on third declension nouns, and that you feel comfortable using them and translating them. And then once you feel that you're in a good spot, you want to read the story aloud. So find a partner from class, anyone you can, read the story to them, have them read it back to you. That way together you're working on your speaking, right, your pronunciation, and you're also working on your listening because you never want to shut those skills off. You don't want to just read and translate this in your head. It's not going to have the same effect. So read it aloud, bring it to life, and you should understand it. So if you can read through this, it might take a time or two. Again, I always tell you to do the read and reread method. But on the second, third time you've read it, you should be able to do it without a vocab. Without a dictionary, looking for vocab help and without having to look up any of the grammar, right? Once you're in that spot, you know that you've got the story under control and you're in a good place. So let's dive in just to make sure we're on the right track. So this story starts like this. You have auctoritas Romana erat magna quod Roma tot milites habeba. So the authority or the power, the auctoritas, it really means more like power. It's kind of the idea, influence. I think the textbook gave you something like that. The power, or Roman power, you might say. Romana is the adjective. So Roman authority or Roman power was great. Magna was large. It was great. Because Roma, meaning Rome, the city of Rome, habebat, it had, right? It's imperfect, but you can translate it as had. It had milites, which means soldiers. And then you have tot there, which means so many, right? This is actually an important word we'll see as you go through your Latin career, you see it for other things. But for right now, it just means they had so many soldiers, right? They have a lot of soldiers, which is true. Their army is very, very big. Then you have milites erant pedites et equites. So the soldiers, the milites, were pedites, which means foot soldiers, right? You can see, like infantrymen, it has the word foot in it, right? And equites, which are the cavalry. And you can tell equites has the word equus, horse in it, right? So the army is made up of foot soldiers and cavalry. Then you have eques, equum habebat, et ab equo pugnabat. So the eques are cavalrymen, right? That's sort of an individual, cavalryman, I guess is the best way to do it. He has habebat in equum, a horse, which makes sense. And pugnabat, he fought ab equo, from the horse. So the book gave you a translation. It means he fought on horseback is, kind of a good way to do it. Treating it, idiomatically, but it makes sense. A horseman or a cavalryman has a horse and fights on horseback. Pedes equum non habebat, pedibus pugnabat. So the foot soldier, the infantryman, the pedes, non habebat, he doesn't have, or did not have, you might say it's imperfect, a horse in equum. He fights, or he fought rather, pugnabat, again, imperfect. He fought pedibus. It doesn't mean with his feet. It means on his feet is really what it means. And fighting on his feet really means he fought on foot, right? Which makes sense. So he is an infantryman. He doesn't have a horse. He just fights on foot. And you can see on the picture to the right, that's an image of, reenactors of what, a Roman legionary or infantryman would look like, right? His armor, all these things. Then you have equites proelium comitebat, sed pedites pilis et gladiis proelium gerebat. So the horsemen, the cavalry, the equites, they start the battle. Comitebat means like they were commencing is kind of one way to do it. And again, the proilium is a word for battle, right? So when you put them together, to committere proilium means to like commence a battle. So you're saying the cavalry, they were starting the battle, they started the battle, but the pedites, the infantry, gerebant proilium, they carried on the battle or fought the battle, pilis et gladiis, with pilas, right, javelins, and gladiis, and with swords, right? The gladius is the famous sword that the infantrymen would carry, and the pila is the javelin that they would throw. Okay, so it's talking about how the cavalry begin the battle, they really start it, but then the infantry carry on the battle. So what it's getting at is if you're envisioning a Roman battle, the cavalry would attack. Usually you have a cavalry skirmish on the wings, right? And then the infantry moves forward, and hopefully if your cavalry wins, maybe you loop around into the flanks of your enemy, something like that. But the sort of heart of a Roman battle is always the infantry, and they're carrying certain weapons. And again, you can learn more about this in the culture unit, but if you look at the picture to the right, that spear-looking thing that the reenactor is carrying, that's the pilum, right? So that's the javelin they would throw. Then we continue. And we have arma peditus erant lorica, galea, scutum, gladius. So the weapons, the arma of the foot soldier, it's genitive singular, so each individual soldier. The arms or weapons of the soldier were the lorica. The lorica is the armor, right? So lorica segmenta, rather, is what you're seeing in this picture. That's the segmented armor, right? So lorica on its own, you could translate it as just meaning armor, right? It's good. Sometimes they say corselet, which is kind of it. But at right in sort of the heyday of the Roman army, it would probably look like the reenactor, the segmented army. You can see there's different sections that we say they articulate, right? Meaning you can move and they overlap each other, right? So that's the first piece, the lorica. The galea is the hat, helmet rather, right? So you can see the reenactors wearing it, and there's usually, in all the pieces we have surviving, the cheek flaps, right, to kind of protect your face. So you have good visibility, and your neck is protected too, right? You don't want someone attacking you in the neck, so there's usually that piece sticking out, but that's the famous legionary helmet. Then you have the scutum and the gladius. The scutum is the shield, right? They use that rounded tower shield, sometimes it's called, right? So the idea here is that you can hold it, and it protects your body roughly from your shoulders down to your knee, give or take. Is what you've got. And the shield is important because if you're ever in a formation, right, you're kind of covering not only your chest area, but a little bit of the man next to you, right? So you're kind of protecting each other, and you make a wall of shields if you need to. And the gladius, again, is their famous sword. So the gladius is a stabbing sword. If you look at it, it's sort of a short, straight sword. So you're not slashing at someone with it. The idea here, the strategy is you'd kind of hit them with your shield to knock them off balance, push kind of up with your shield, and then you try to stab them is the idea. So these are all famous pieces of weaponry for the Roman legionary. And again, you can look them up in the culture unit, but it's describing what a Roman soldier, foot soldier would look like. Then you have in sinistra scutum, in dextra pilum portabatur. So here you have imperfect passive, so something was carried. So when you look at this line, you're starting with the scutum. So the shield, portabatur, was carried in sinistra, in the left hand. Right, and you can see that the reenactor has that too. The left side or left hand is where you have the shield. So again, the scutum, the shield, was carried, portabatur, in sinistra, in the left side or in the left hand. The pilum, portabatur, so the pilum, the javelin, was carried in dextra, in the right hand. So this is the standard formation. So it's a good question that sometimes my students ask. I guess you can't be left-handed in the Roman army. You'd have to learn to fight with your right, but it's very standardized. And the idea is if you have a righty and a lefty next to each other, if you're holding your weaponry in different hands and you're standing next to each other, you're going to bump into each other. Not good. So it's all kind of standardized. Then you have interdum Milites Romani oppidum oppugnabant et magni lapides in muros oppidi mittebantur. So sometimes interdum, right? Sometimes the Milites Romani, the Roman soldiers, oppugnabant, they were besieging, or they besieged the oppidum, a town. So besieging is an interesting idea. This is where you basically set up camp around the town. You try to surround it so nobody gets in, nobody gets out, and you can starve them out, right? If they don't have a water supply, it probably wouldn't be too much time before they give up. And food too, right? If you starve them long enough, they'll run out of food and they'll hopefully give up. But the other thing you would do if you're besieging a town is you'd have siege weapons here, which is what they're referencing. It says they besiege a town and magni lapides, so big or huge stones, mittebantur, they were sent. It really means they were thrown, but they were sent into the muros oppidi, into the walls of the town. Right? So this is referencing things like, catapults, basically. So if you could get a siege weapon like a catapult, or even a ballista kind of would do the same thing. You'd be able to fire rocks at the walls of the town. And, if you're not going to wait them out, maybe you can knock the walls down and then attack, right? It's just getting a little bit of sort of strategy of what a Roman soldier would do. Then we get to the next part, and you have Virtus Militum Romanorum erat magna. So the virtus, and again, this is a more complicated word than it seems in English, but virtue is kind of one way to do it. Virtue, bravery, courage, valor, manliness, they all kind of tie into this word. So maybe go with courage for now. The courage of the Militum Romanorum, of Roman soldiers, those are both genitive plural, erat magna, it was great. So these would have to be very brave men to fight like this. You have a regibus et principibus multarum terrarum Romani timebantur, quod fama militum Romanorum erat magna. So you have the Romans, right? The Romani timebantur, they were feared. It's imperfect passive. So that's why you have the two ablatives here, the ablative of agent, right? Who were they feared by? You're saying they were feared by the regibus, by the kings, and principibus, and chiefs or leaders of multarum terrarum, of much of the world is kind of one way to translate, of many lands, maybe you could say would be a better way to do it. Yeah, many lands actually probably works better. But it's describing the kings and the chiefs, right? So the kings and the chiefs of many lands are afraid of the Romans. Literally, though, it's passive, so the Romans were feared by these people. And they were feared because the fama, the fame, right, of the Militum Romanorum, of the Roman soldiers, erat magna, it was great. So not only are they very brave and very skilled, which they were, but their reputation kind of preceded them. So the book is trying to tell you that a lot of people were afraid of the Roman army because of how fierce they were and how good they were at warfare. Sometimes their reputation would precede them and people wouldn't bother fighting with them. Then you have liberi, regum et principum, saepe erant obsides Romanorum et Romam ducebantur. So liberi are children, so that's your subject. So the children, regum, of the king, et principum, and of the chief. Often those children, erant, they were obsides, they were hostages, Romanorum, genitive plural, of the Romans. And ducebantur, the children, were sent Romam, to Rome. There's your accusative of place toward, right? Remember when you have the name of a city, you don't need a prepositional phrase. So this is actually hitting at a really important idea, and sometimes we call this Romanization. But one of the tactics of the Roman army was if they conquer a place, to make sure that you kind of stay in line, they would take the children of the king or the chief hostage, right? So you'd take their oldest sons, you'd bring them back to Rome, and you would teach them basically, or give them Roman culture. So you teach them Latin, you'd educate them, all these things. And the idea was, one, it keeps that chief in line, right? If we have your son, the threat is that we will kill him if you don't cooperate. But two, you're training that boy to be, or the children, right? Most often boys, to be Roman, right? So when you send them back, when it's their turn to be king, they've been basically Romanized. So maybe they like you a little bit better, right? That's sort of the strategy that the Romans would use. Then you have the last line, multas fabulas de obsidibus Romanorum legimus. So we will read legemus, that's future tense, right? You can tell because lego, legere is a third conjugation verb, and there's an E in front of that ending, future tense. So we will read, meaning nothing to do with the Romans, us as readers of this textbook. We will read multas fabulas, many stories, de obsidibus, right, about sieges Romanorum, of the Romans, or sorry, about hostages of the Romans, right, not sieges. So it's saying we will read a lot of stories about Roman hostages, right, hostages of the Romans. So that's how this story goes. It's a shorter story. There's a lot of culture here because they're hitting on really cool stuff in terms of Roman history, the Roman army, all this good stuff. So I'd encourage you to look it up. But the focus here is really on those third declension nouns. And you saw a lot of them, right? Hostages, soldiers, kings, chiefs. These are all third declension nouns. So hopefully by this point, you've been feeling pretty good about it from the first story in chapter 23. And you were able to read this without too much trouble. But if you have any problems at all, any questions, you're not sure about something, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to help you. Otherwise, keep at it. Keep reading it, like I said, until you can read this without needing vocab or grammar help. And that's how you know you're in a really good place. So keep at it. Let me know if you need anything, but otherwise, good luck.